opportunity means being in the right place at the right time and being open to new challenges. Today's workforce will average 10 job changes in a 40-year career span. That's not the same as my father's era, where he only worked for one employer. That's a reality, and I would suggest it's not a bad thing. The ability to change, to grow, and to adapt to your surroundings and situation keeps us stimulated and flexible. These are good qualities in a world changing at an alarming pace. A strategy not just for survival, but for thriving. My own career has evolved from a series of opportunities, and that's why I'm here today with a newly minted Master of Science in Community and Regional Planning. 24 years ago, I graduated with a BS in history, having typed my papers on a typewriter and done all my research in a library with real books. I usually tell people that my major was mixology and party giving with a minor in European history. I married my college sweetheart and we moved to Washington, D.C., where he joined the CIA and I worked for a professional association. Our first overseas assignment was Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Dar was a great place to recruit spies and develop relationships with diplomats from less than friendly countries, because we were all in this crazy third world situation together. The embassy provided us with a house, and since the Tanzanians kept stealing our water pipes, they had to bring us a tanker of river water every couple of days too. The river water was dirty, muddy, buggy. You had to let it settle for a couple hours, and then you could boil it, and then you could filter it, and then you could use it. Electricity was another basic service that we took for granted in America and came to appreciate in Dar. The Tanzanian power grid was dicey at best, and our generator in the backyard would run for weeks at a time when the local power failed. Food was another adventure. There were no grocery stores. Since we lived right on the Indian Ocean, we could buy fresh seafood at the fish market and indigenous fruit and vegetables at the local stands. My husband provided meat through hunting, and I learned how to butcher a zebra and a warthog based on diagrams for a cow and a pig in my Joy of Cooking cookbook. Adaptation. I got a job with the embassy and quickly realized that although I had no talent for languages, I had flunked out of French, German, and Spanish in school. Swahili would be the key to my survival in a country where few people spoke English. Bargaining at the marketplaces, dealing with embassy contractors, and working with over 200 non-English speaking employees gave me the incentive to learn a foreign language that I had never had before. And in doing so, I discovered a lot about their culture and how they thought. For instance, in Swahili, there's no word for maintenance. That's important when you're trying to explain to your motor pool drivers that they need to change the oil regularly, or when you're trying to decide between an Air Tanzania flight and a Swiss Air flight. That's very important with an airplane. On the other hand, it was a very rich lexicon for inquiring about your family, your home, your health. I learned that in Tanzanian culture, connections with your community are important, and you must always take the time to find out about the people you do business with in the market or elsewhere. It showed me that a foreign language provides an amazing opportunity to see the world through a different set of eyes. Our next posting was one country north, Nairobi, Kenya. I had a brand new baby, he's 16 now, and I was going crazy being cooped up in the house with no contact with the rest of the world. So when the embassy called and begged me to work, I took the job before I even asked what it was. Somalia, which bordered Kenya, had been in political turmoil since 1991, and the U.S. government wanted to reestablish a diplomatic presence. We couldn't call it an embassy because there was no formal government to recognize, so we called it the U.S. Liaison Office, and we staffed it with diplomats and military advisors. Mogadishu, Somalia was a battlefield, and it was my job to keep the USLO running from my desk in Nairobi. I learned how to wheel and deal with the foreign militaries we relied on for transportation in and out of Mogadishu. I swapped a case of bourbon for a flight for my ambassador, and I cooked for the Canadian pilots to thank them for getting emergency supplies up to the USLO. It was an exciting job that led me to my current field of emergency management planning. But because it was so focused on the community in Mogadishu, it left me feeling disconnected with my own in Nairobi. I took a position as the community liaison officer for the embassy and its population of over 400 Americans at post. I help the employees and their families learn how to navigate the city and the country on their own, bargain in the markets, advocate for their children in the schools, and seek help when the stresses of overseas life became too great. I became a liaison with the other foreign expatriates in Nairobi and to Kenyans who wanted to get to know more about America. My writing skills were polished with State Department reporting, excerpts for travel books, and guidebooks for embassy personnel. I introduced Kenyan artists to my community and my community to the villages where they did their work. We connected volunteers with opportunities in orphanages, women's centers, educational outreach, and health clinics. When congressional delegations came to visit Nairobi, somehow I was always the designated safari guide. But it also gave me an opportunity to show them how we live in a foreign and sometimes hostile environment and the impact of the diplomatic community in our host country. The opportunities to make a difference were endless through contributions of time and interest. From Nairobi, we went to San Francisco. Yes, the CIA does stuff there too. And our family grew to 4. California was as much of a culture shock as a foreign country. So after a year, we opted to return to the D.C. area and pursue another posting in one of the newly opened embassies in the former USSR. We bought our first home and simultaneously put down roots in suburban Virginia and prepared to go off on our next adventure, to Tbilisi, Georgia. Unlike Dar es Salaam and Nairobi, Tbilisi was a new embassy without the infrastructure that more established posts offered. We were the first wave of families, and there were only 3 of us, so we really shook things up for all the single workaholics that had built the embassy to that point. Tbilisi had been a beautiful city with medieval architecture and government-supplied heat and electricity. But after Georgia broke away from the USSR, they could no longer afford to pay for these services, and it became more like the Wild West. Unemployment was extremely high, and there were no social services for the poor, the handicapped, or the elderly. The trees that would line the graceful avenues were chopped down to heat homes. The parks that had been teeming with squirrels, birds, and rabbits were barren. They had been hunted for food. Driving the city's grid of streets was a daily test of survival, since none of the stoplights worked anymore, and one-way signs were more of a suggestion than a rule. I elected the opportunity to take a community liaison officer position again, because I knew I would be able to create new programs and open doors with our host country. I learned Russian and a little Georgian, which was a completely different alphabet and language from Russian. My sons attended the international school, which only had 16 students from almost as many countries. Although life in Georgia was extremely difficult, the extraordinary opportunities made it my favorite post. An archaeologist who was working as an embassy guard helped me lead tours to monasteries with ancient frescoes and Roman mosaics right under the surface of a farmer's field. We hiked into the hills to where, in 1400, a Mongol warrior, Tamerlan, had laid siege to a castle with catapults. The stones he had used as projectiles were still among the ruins. Our friends took us to an ancient walled city that overlooked the Silk Road to Armenia, where the oldest human remains outside of Africa had been found. There were no official travel guides, road signs, and not many paved roads. So these gems had to be shared rather than found on our own. By building a program for embassy employees and their families that encouraged them to explore Georgia and meet its people, I strengthened my own community and our mission of diplomacy. We returned to Virginia and to our house on the cul-de-sac. My boys were the only ones at school that had never seen SpongeBob SquarePants. But they assimilated, and when my husband declared a crisis of conscience and left the CIA, we assumed our moving days were over. With a new future ahead of me, I assessed my skills and ambitions and built a successful personal chef business. One day, my husband dropped a bombshell that he'd been offered the job of a lifetime in Philadelphia, and he wanted to uproot the whole family to go. What none of us knew was that he was ill with a hereditary neurological disease, and he would be dead in less than 2 years. After his death, I considered moving back to Oregon, where my aging parents lived, but chose instead to downsize and to travel with the boys. We took domestic road trips and bigger adventures to Paris, Amsterdam, and even back to East Africa. As we explored our grief, we also gained confidence from conquering challenges in our new lives. When I learned about the community and regional planning program at Temple, I knew I'd found the link between my former life and my future. 4 years later, I now have a new husband and 2 stepsons, and a degree that was hard-won and so worth the challenges it presented. It builds upon my previous experience and its open possibilities to an exciting future. Remaining flexible and open to opportunity, I have mastered new technology and built a network of colleagues that I look forward to working with as we tackle creating sustainable communities in the 21st century. Thank you to the Temple community and my family who have joined me for this latest adventure in my evolution. I am proof that recognizing opportunity and taking advantage of new experiences will keep you flexible and adaptable in a swiftly changing world. So get out there and travel. Learn a foreign language, a new skill, volunteer in your community, and never be afraid to challenge yourself. Thank you.